Hello, everyone. Finally, I'm up here. I was wondering for a little bit. At any rate, as Jen mentioned, I'm going to be talking about my latest book. Not that I'm counting, but it's my 12th book. Believe it or not. 7 of them are hiking guides, and then this one is, I don't call it a hiking guide, I call it a travel log. And so because there's, the world is not easy right at the moment. So I thought I'm going to make this talk just a real pleasure walking along the trail, and I hope you're going to be there with me. It's better. Great. And I hope for myself I can kind of relive those 40 days that I was out there, and that was in 2022. So I will continue. And I hope I don't restart the computer.
Me too.
Yeah. Let me.
Oh,
Okay. Enter. Okay. Okay. So a little bit about myself. I practice this talk. So it's the first time I've given this talk, and I do want to mention that, which seems appropriate because so much of the Bruce Trail started from the Hamilton Naturalist Club. I don't know if everybody knows that, but really this was sort of the seat of the ideas that came to the Bruce Trail. So it seems fitting that I'm here today. But I thought I'd give you a little bit of a discussion with me. My partner said, you have to let them know a little bit about who you are. And so here I am. Needless to say, horses were a big part of my life. I was always pretty outdoors. And I grew up in Caledon, and I still live in Caledon. And so I came down here today and enjoyed the trip. A lot of you saw my hiking guides on the way in here. I started writing them the first one came out, the red one, Caledon, came out in 2015. It was supposed to be a one of. So much fun that I just started. I had a series of books, and so I wrote 6 hiking guides in 6 years. 5 of them? 6 of them. 6 of them in 6 years. The most recent one until this year was in 2020 during COVID. And then this one on the closest to me, that's just about to come out. It's at the printers, it's about to come in. With me tonight is Jill Steed, and Jill's at the back of the room. She lives here in Hamilton, and she's the designer, not on the new book, because I went to a real publisher, but I self-published all these books, and Jill did most of the work on them, I think, making them beautiful. So thank you, Jill. But let's get into it. So what I'm going to do tonight is really just talk about some of the landmarks I saw along my route. The book, as it's written, I wrote it, I wrote a chapter for every day I was on the trail. There's a map for each day. They'd be hard to follow my routes. They're complicated, but I am coming out with it as kind of a passport journal that'll have directions, probably in May. But until then, lots of good stories in here. I think they're good stories. So this is the book on the left. Anybody recognize? I'm going to do a lot of this. Do you recognize some people that walk the trail? The photo in the middle. Anybody want to take a guess for that? That's the Nasagawaya Canyon in between. Yell out if you think between Rattlesnake Point and Crawford Lake. Those are my favorite places. And then the waterfall on the left. We're in Hamilton. This is waterfall capital of the world. Anybody want to take another? Bridal Falls, I heard. Yeah, what do you think? Well, it's kind of tricky. This is Inglis Falls and Owen Sound. I thought I'd trick you. And I must admit, when I read that Hamilton was the waterfall capital of the world, I kind of poo-pooed that. I went, oh, come on. And then I looked it up as part of this book, and of course, Hamilton has more waterfalls than any other city in the world. And when I first heard that too, I thought, oh, they're little trickle waterfalls. And then I came across them. So you're lucky. So I walked the Bruce Trail. How many people here have walked Bruce Trail at all? Most people. How many people have walked the, here we are in Iroquois, right? The Iroquois section. Quite a few people. How many people have walked the whole Bruce Trail? Yes, Peter? Anybody else? Ah, wow. Well, we got a trip for you today. I've always wanted to walk the Bruce Trail. It's about 900 kilometers. Ever since I was a little child, I grew up right on the Niagara Circle. And so I started at the southern terminus, as most people do, down in Niagara, finished at Tobermory. I didn't do it in 40 consecutive days. I started on the 3rd of May in 2022, and I finished in October 7th. I took the summer off because hiking during the hot July and August is not the greatest time, and it's so beautiful in the spring and fall. So I thought I'll take the summer off and get back on the trail. I just put in the fast, so it took me 40 days, or 42, you'll learn. So Elias Brave, I don't know how to pronounce his name, he did it in 8 days and 16 hours. And the fastest woman is Karen Holland, and she did it slightly over that. So not really the way I wanted to do the Bruce Trail, nor would I be capable, but. So this is the southern terminus, and that's down in Niagara, Queenston Heights. And when I got there on the first day, I drove up at about 7 o'clock in the morning. I drove into the parking lot. You had to buy a ticket at one of those machines. And I drove up, or I got in my car, walked up to the machine and started pressing the buttons. And it informed me that I couldn't buy a ticket because it was nighttime. It was 7 o'clock in the morning. And then it told me that daytime in Queenston Park doesn't start till 10 a.m. And so here I decided to do this loopy. I'll talk about the way I did the Bruce Trail, because I did it in loops. And I thought, I'm going to do it my way, right? But first thing happens, and what happens is a parking machine is telling me how to do my trail. So I got back in my car and I drove down the hill. How many people have been to Queenston? Yeah. And so I drove down the hill into the village of Queenston. I found a parking lot that had a smarter parking machine, and I bought my ticket. But that meant that I had to start the hike on a side trail. And so I took, for people that don't know, the Bruce Trail is about 900 kilometers long, but there are 450 kilometers of side trails. We are so lucky, and that makes it different than a lot of other trails. And it allowed me to do these loops that Jen mentioned. So I started on this side trail, and it climbed up to the top of the park, so up the heights, the Queenston Heights. And by doing that, I had this a wonderful lookout over the Niagara River, which, is such a huge pounding river. It was the United States on the other side of the river. And it was also the spot, very near the spot where during the War of 1812, the American troops came up and almost won the Battle of Queenston Heights. And so it was this wonderful bit of history that I all of a sudden got, that I really wasn't thinking I was going to walk the Bruce Trail to learn history. But the history that's in that park, it was amazing. Oh, and I got something else here. So the other thing, I always wanted to do an illustrated journal of my hikes or travels, but I couldn't draw, which is I can write, but I couldn't draw. And so I started taking drawing lessons about 2 years ago. And so for every hike in the book, I drew something from the trail. So this was my first attempt in the book. I traced it from a photograph. But you got to start somewhere, right? So one of the things that I came across in Queenston Heights in the park, there was the statue of what's the name of the university?
Brock.
Brock, thank you. Big statue of Brock. Lots of stories about him getting blown up, that statue getting blown up, but they're in the book. Some great references to some Indigenous individual, John Norton, and I'm going to get them. Of course, I can't read my notes because I've got my glasses. And I learned a lot about the role of Indigenous people in the War of 1812 and the fact that if it hadn't have been for our First Nations, we probably would be Americans today. And now there are some great references and statues and memorials for some of these individuals. So again, I mean, this huge history lesson, who thunk it? But the other thing I came across was this statue with this, in the bottom right-hand corner, this bonneted older woman in it. And I thought, who the heck is that? And so I went up close and I read it and it said it was Laura Secord. And of course, my memory of Laura Secord is the top picture from the chocolates, right? And I was trying to figure out these two women, that just didn't look the same. And as I went there, I walked part of the Laura Secord Legacy Trail. I'd never heard about it before. I knew that Laura Secord was active in this part of the world, that part of the world. But I learned more, and I'll talk a little bit about her again, but who knows the story of the cow milking, hiding behind the cow? How many people have heard that story? How many people know it's not true? It's not true. She didn't hide behind a cow. Yeah, I've seen people shaking their heads. I didn't know that. But anyway, I'll talk a little bit more about her. So going on to the second day, that sort of happened on the first day, was my first history lesson in that part of the world. And the second day, what I did is I decided I'd walk into two different areas. I wanted to walk to the Welland Canal. I've never seen the Welland Canal. And I wanted to walk into the Wood End Conservation Area. Some of you might know that. And I parked in between and I started walking. It was a beautiful day. It had been raining for about 3 days. It was very wet. But I came around a corner and here was this odd river because it had these concrete sides to it and these concrete ramps about every half kilometer. And I'm trying to read what this is. Now everybody's probably laughing at me here going, da, 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 da. It was the Welland Canal. Who knew there were 4 Welland Canals? Anybody know? Like some people knew there were 4 Welland. Somebody must know that. I had no idea. I thought the Welland Canal was the Welland Canal was the Welland Canal. So this was the 3rd Welland Canal. There were 4 of them. And this one was built finished in 1887. It had 26 locks in it. That's why they were so regular. Just to give you some history, the first one was opened in 1827, the second one in 1845, this one in 1887, and then finally the 4th and the current one in 1928. But what I found even more interesting was that this canal had 26 locks. I can't remember how many the current one has. I didn't write it down, sorry. But the Panama Canal, we all know the Panama. How many locks do you think there are in the Panama Canal? 12. And how about the Suez Canal? Does anybody know how many locks there are in the Suez Canal? 0. There are no locks it's just the cut through, it's flat. Well, later on in the hike, I went through by Thorold, Ontario. You've probably heard of Thorold, Ontario. Used to be called Beaver Dams. It's when it was one of the battles in the War of 1812, the Battle of Beaver Dam. And so that was kind of neat. But at Beaver Dam, what they write about is they call Thorold where ships climb the escarpment. And there's something called the twin flight locks, and there are 3 of them. It's locks 4, 5, and 6. Anybody know this? Locks, some people do. Yeah, Tony. At any rate, so there's the twin flight locks there, and the ships go up 42.6 meters through that section of the Welland Canal. And that's twice as high as the 12 locks in the Panama Canal takes ships up. So it's the highest lift of a canal, Locksmith Canal, in the world. So, we got more waterfalls, we got the highest carry. So, I mean, this is the stuff I was learning on this is not what you think you're going to learn on a trail, but here we go. If somebody gave me kind of a 15, maybe Jill, a 15-minute kind of warning at like 8:45. And people, if you want to ask questions, go ahead. Sometimes the best hikes are when you take a trail you don't know. So if somebody has a question, I'm happy to kind of go down a trail and leave my presentation. This is one of the fun things. Again, this is near Thorold. I was on the Ray Lowe's, not the Ray Lowe's, but the Burt Lowe side trail. And they have these famous murals along the way. And normally I don't like graffiti on murals, but this one, I thought they were turning them into the Beatles. It's the glasses on John Lennon, I think. But now this was where, this was really interesting. Again, this is what's called the First Nation Peace Monument, and it's near a place called the Sioux House. Have any of you visited this? Yeah. So I got here, and this is a monument built by Douglas Cardinal, who is perhaps Canada's foremost architect, Indigenous. And he designed this, and it's like this cocoon. And when you sit in it, it really is like a cocoon. It was a cool day, but it was sunny when I was there. And he's designed wampum belts. How many people are familiar with wampum belts? Yeah. So wampum belts are a First Nations. They're usually reconciliation, peace agreements, and he's designed those into this monument. But what really got me, it just proved this idea of connectivity that we talk about with trails, because the Sioux House was where the British had their headquarters during the War of 1812. And it's right next door to this monument. And that's where Laura Secord walked to. She was 37 at the time. She had 6 children, and she walked 32 kilometers. And it was to tell the British that she'd heard about. They were billeting. The Americans had taken over the town of Queenston, and they billeted some Americans in her house, and they were talking about this battle. And so she took it upon herself to walk all the way to the Sioux House to let them know that this battle was forthcoming. So that was really her story. She didn't hide behind any cow. Oh yeah. I didn't copy that one. Okay. So anybody want to tell me what this is? You're a naturalist. I've never seen it before. This is in Short Hills Provincial Park, actually.
What is it?
And it's named after Thomas Jefferson because it grows by his place and it blooms close to his birthday. Anyway, yeah, I've never seen it before. It's not very common. All kinds of it there. And it's very close to this waterfall. Anybody know this waterfall? That's in Short Hills, and that water is, that plant is very close by. I guess it's closed, you said, though, is that right? Yeah.
Our nature sanctuary,
Okay.
which is also named
Short Hills. Oh, okay.
Super confusing.
Yes, okay. Anybody seen this site? So that's at the top of a very big climb on a day that mostly I just skipped along the trail. I've never felt so good in my life, but on this day, oh man, I took about 10 steps up this hill, and then I'd stop, sit down, and then I'd take 10 more steps. I don't know what was wrong with me, but then at the top, there was the devil's, the devil's punch bowl market where I had lunch. Is it closed? I think it's closed. The Devil's Punch Bowl market. It's closed, didn't it? Oh man, I'm glad it was there when I went. I had something to eat. And there are I think it says 106 light bulbs in there. Anybody know this? Mhm. That's right here in Hamilton. I call it the Fred Flintstone stairs. Of course, you have many stairs going up the, many very modern stairways going up the escarpment, and Hamiltonians are very proud. When I came across a website, and this fitness instructor, he's climbed all the stairs and he ranked them on which ones were the most difficult. And he's got this whole kind of website that tells you which of the stairs, which is the longest, which one takes how many calories to go up. I only had to go halfway up one of them, but I passed by this staircase, which I loved. In between, it's in between. I went up the, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of them, sorry. It's on the escarpment.
Near Mohawk,
Yulee stairs.
Yeah.
It's a Yulee stairs. Yes, you got it. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Stairs are made by a certain person.
Yulee, not Fred Flintstone. And anybody know what this landmark is? That's Rattlesnake Point, exactly. Across the valley from Crawford Lake. And the valley that I showed right at the beginning was in between. One of the interesting things, it looks a long way away, doesn't it? I have to get there and back again. But when I got over there, I kept wondering, for a long time, I wondered why it was called Rattlesnake Point. And there are a lot of people, you can read many reasons why they think it's called Rattlesnake Point. But when I was doing the research for this book, a friend of mine sent me a diary excerpt from Lady Simcoe's, so wife of Sir John Simcoe, Governor General. So from 1775, she had a diary, whatever you write in your diary, and she happened to comment that summer when she was there, someone had told her that they killed 700 rattlesnakes in Burlington Bay. Anybody know what kind of rattlesnakes they would have been? No, timber rattlesnakes, which they're locally extinct. They do exist in North America. They were a bit more venomous than the Massasaugas, but we don't have them anymore. But obviously they were prolific at one time. And this is in Crawford Lake. Yeah, I love these carvings. I often don't like the wooden carvings, but these ones, they're larger than life. That's probably about 9-10 feet tall. And they're all of endangered species. There's a monarch butterfly and a Jefferson salamander. They're absolutely beautiful. So Crawford Lake is pretty fascinating. Now, this was kind of interesting. I love boardwalks. Anybody who's read my hiking guides know that I love boardwalks, and I'm always talking about them. And there's a boardwalk that goes all the way around Crawford Lake. And I hadn't planned to go all the way around because I was tired, but once I get on a boardwalk, I can't stop. And I was pleased because I got to revisit this tree, and I call it a corkscrew cedar, but of course it's a white cedar. I don't know whether it's alive or dead, but sadly, when I wrote the Halton book in 2016, it looked like this with the 3 stems, and now 2 of them have come down. But they know the trail's pretty well. The trees, has anybody seen that tree or noticed it? Yeah, it's pretty cool. Anybody know what this is? Any bird, right? This is something called the Duffin Gap. Anybody know what the Duffin Gap is? So the Duffin Gap it's near Mount Nemo. And in 1962, there's a huge aggregate hit to this side of this bridge. And the aggregate company in 1962 allegedly, they want to be sued, allegedly decided to blast this hole in the Niagara Escarpment so that they could get their trucks to the highway faster. And so what was interesting to me, I mean, I always sort of see this as a symbol of it's the only break in the Niagara Escarpment. And it was done for reasons that, you know, I think they're better. I don't really agree with cutting a hole in the escarpment to move trucks. But I'd always thought this was the only break in the Niagara Escarpment. But then by walking this, I realized that Welland Canal also is a big hole across the escarpment. And both of them are these transportation routes. One, you know, the Welland Canal really gets ships around Niagara Falls. This one got trucks to the highway, which is kind of sad, but they put this bridge in, so at least you can get through now. 40 meters long. Now here, continuing along, this is a day a friend and I, we walked through Hilton Falls Conservation Area. It was a long, about a 29, it was a 29-kilometer walk. And it was a beautiful day, and we're walking along. We went across the Dufferin Gap, and then we got into Hilton Falls. Have people been into the Hilton Falls? So we just got to the waterfall, and it had been a beautiful day, but it was starting to get kind of dark, kind of like the eclipse today. And the two of us looked behind us, and the sky was just this bruised purple. And we knew, and it was that sort of calm before the storm. And we thought, oh my gosh, something's coming. And there were picnic tables there, and there's a big fire pit. So we thought, let's sit down, have our lunch. It was that time of day before we have to, you know, before it starts to rain. Of course, we sat down, and all of a sudden these big plops, you know, those great plops of rain, how it comes down sometime. And we looked around, and honest to God, we were so lucky because I don't think there was any cover for 10 kilometers, except behind us, they had a pile of firewood for the fire pit with a tarp over top of it. So we ran over to this and got under the tarp, and along with the spiders and the earwigs, we're sitting on this pile. And a couple minutes after we got in there, another couple came, and we're all inside this. It's leaking, but at least we're relatively dry. And this storm, I mean, it just let loose for about half an hour. We were just so lucky. We would have been miserable. Anyway, so it finally stopped, and we sort of peek out, and you could feel that the pressure had dropped. You know, it was that sort of sinking feeling sometimes after it's quiet. And so my friend and I, we start walking along, and all the trees are laden, and every time we touch a tree, the water falls down on us. And we get up a little higher, and we're going through an area where there are trees, but they're mostly just, you know, saplings. And maybe the biggest tree was 8 inches in diameter. And we're walking along there, and all of a sudden there's this gust of wind comes at us, and we kind of look at each other, and then this other gust of wind, and then this wind picked up. And so we hide behind the biggest tree, hoping that if something comes at us, we'll be protected by a tree that's 6 inches wide. And we didn't know what to do. And then we hear this huge crash. We couldn't see this huge crash. It was obviously a tree coming down. I mean, that's how windy. How many of you remember that derecho wind we had 2 years ago? That was the derecho day. And here we are in the forest. We got off lucky because we only heard one tree come down. When we got back to our car, we learned that it was I wrote the number down. Like I said, it's the first time I've given this talk, sorry. And then I can't find it. But at any rate, it was the 6th most costly storm that has ever happened in Ontario. 11 people were killed that day, almost all of them by trees coming down. So as we continued on, we just kept coming by these overturned trees. I mean, huge, like look at the side, this is a double oak that's come down, and there were huge maples. And we just thought, you know, but by the luck of whatever. And we just kept seeing all these trees coming down. And this one I took actually a couple days later through the terracotta area, and it really got devastated. I'm glad I wasn't there. So, I lived through the derecho of 2022. It was a huge storm. Derecho in Spanish means straight. And that's what it was, a straight wind. Didn't let up. Yes.
We had, I live in Oakville and we had very few trees. We had 700 trees.
Come down.
And my husband saw them 15 seconds and down. 2 fell on a car
Uh-huh.
and on Lakeshore, and it didn't hit like the cockpit of a car. It hit the front and the back.
Back.
And the person was gone. They probably in panic.
Wow.
But it was, we remember that day.
Yeah.
It was in May.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a crazy
Very
day.
costly.
Yeah, very costly. I think it was $875 million it cost to clean up. Anybody recognize this? That's the keyhole in limestone. Another kind of fun. It's a great place to take kids for a hike to limestone. We're getting, sort of we're not mid-trail, even close, but we'll keep going. Anybody know this? Yeah, the Tobermory Badlands. Now this is in my backyard. Now you can't walk on these because they've got them closed off. But when I was a kid, you could walk on them. And there is something. How many people have walked on before they close them down? Yeah, there's something magical on. I don't know what it is. Some kind of weird energy. I'm glad they closed them off because they were getting ruined. But that's sort of my hometown. Oh, and this is my new hiking guide that's coming out at the printers right now. And I get a painting commission. I commission a painting for each of the covers. And so a local artist in Alton, where I live, she painted the Badlands for me for the cover of the upcoming book. This is in terracotta. And I asked the question, is it a gull or a burl? I think it's a burl. I heard somebody say a burl. I read up a little bit about the difference between gulls and burls. And burls have this really knottly, and I think this is the biggest burl I've ever seen. I don't know what other people, they do come big. What you see on the trail.
You don't kind of dream of.
I think it was an oak. Yeah. There's oak in there, and I just was looking at the stem. I'm pretty sure it's an oak. Ferns, lots of ferns along the way. Anybody want to from right? Anybody know what this one is? I believe it's a Christmas fern, this one. And somebody told me, maybe somebody knows differently, they're called Christmas ferns because they have a little hook on each pental. What are the little bits on the frond called? Okay. And there's a little hook on them, which is different than the standard fern. And that was the hook where you hung your Christmas stockings. Okay. The one in the middle, anybody want to take a, yeah, that's the walking fern. And that's endangered. I don't know if it's endangered or just at risk, but and there is a walking fern side trail. There's walking ferns in the Forks of Credit. And it tip roots. That's why it's called walking. So it has these long, very unfern-like leaves, and they're really long, and they come into the ground, the end of them, and they root there, and then another one grows up and it roots. And that's why they call it walking fern. The top left or top right? Yeah, maidenhair. I love maidenhair ferns. Yeah. And below that, Hartstown, I heard somebody say it. Again, another one that's endangered. And I was on a big hike in Europe this last summer through Austria, Slovenia, and Italy. And in Austria, I came to this area where these Hartstown ferns were everywhere. It was like, oh my gosh. Hartstown fern. Hart is the name of a deer, and tongue, I guess it has a narrow tongue. Ideas of where this is. This is in the Forks of Credit, so not too far from Cheltenham Badlands. It's a trestle bridge, and this is a train that ran between Streetsville and Orangeville And I'm pleased to say that the region of Peel, Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon have purchased this, and this is being turned into a rail trail.
Right.
Put this in. This is along the trail as well, along Airport Road, and it's a Buddhist temple basically. Wat means temple, Lao it's Laotian, so it's Lao, and that's the name of the temple. And there's this temple not far away there's a Tai Chi center. Not far from that is a monastery. And this area, if you believe in Shirley MacLaine, is a big area for ley lines, which are these energy lines. They say ley lines line over the Camino de Santiago, and that's what Sir James, anyway, but he's not Sir James, but anyway, Saint James, thank you. That's what he was following when he went to Compostela. And Caledon, this is in Caledon, and that's what they say too. There are a lot of ley lines, and there are all these religious organizations that have set up. Anybody seen walk this trail? Yes, yes. This is in the Hockley Valley. And there are a lot of cars along I think I might do a book one time of just cars I've seen along the trail. But this is a well-known one. It's in the Hockley Valley. And I walked by it that day. And I've got a great little story about this one. So this is a 1939, what is it, a Chevy Master Deluxe sedan. And it was powered by an engine from 1947. All you men that came out tonight, you can drool over this. It was owned by the Navette family that farmed in the area. And it's not one of my better sketches, but there it is. And that is the car. And what happened was when I wrote my Caledon book, actually, my first hiking guide, I put the story about this, or I put this photo in the book, and I had a little bit of information about it. And then one day I got an email, and it was this man. He was from Beachy, Saskatchewan. He's a reverend, and he had been in Fergus, and he'd been in the bookstore there when they had one. And he'd come across my book, and he was looking through the book, and lo and behold, he saw this photograph, and it was his father's car. Yeah, it would have been his father's car. And so he told me stories about it, and then he sent me that photograph. And it was their farm vehicle. Neat, eh? Hey, another site. These are all along the Bruce trails. Yeah, monocliffs. That's right. This is monocliffs. This is there's a great viewing platform. You can see across the escarpment, and then you come down into these cliffs, I guess. And what's famous? Anybody know what's famous about monocliffs? Is it very famous? What grows there? Ancient cedars, right? So there are these little tiny cedars. They're not any bigger around than my arm, the trunk, and they're over 400 years old. There are older ones in the province than the ones here, but they grow down. They grow off these cliffs. This is the power plant on the Pine River. The Pine River just roars through here. It's a place called Kilgory. We're getting into Dufferin. My Dufferin hiking guide was the third hiking guide I did. It's the only one that I didn't sell enough of them for it to be a national bestseller. And it's because nobody knows where Dufferin is. Does anybody here know where Dufferin is? A few people. You probably live there. It's Orangeville, Shelburne. And so if you want to go hiking, go to Dufferin because nobody knows where it is and you'll be all on your own. Great hiking then. Now this is just a little story that I'll get into. When I walked the trail, what I did, I would drive to the beginning of the trail. I'd walk usually up the main Bruce Trail for a way, and then I would loop back on these side trails that I talked about. sometimes, most of the time I was on Bruce Trail side trails, but I also took other trails if it would form a loop. And so I had to stay places. So I stayed, I booked a little Airbnb down in St. Catharines and stayed there. In Hamilton, I booked an Airbnb. That's another story. I won't go into it. It was like being back at university, somebody else's dirty dishes all the time in the sink. But at any rate, then I got close to home, so I could just, go for day trips from home. But then I was starting to get further north, and so I found this glamping. This guy had glamping trailers. This is near St. Hampton. And so I thought, great, it's a good price. And so I drove in, I hiked all day, and then I drove in, and farmer, I think I've got a photo of him. Farmer Doug came, and he was a real character. He tried everything. He tried a husky. He had huskies. It was very funny. He said he tried a petting zoo, and that didn't work out. He tried something else, and then he had husky dogs, and you could come and take rides in the sled dogs. And he said, yeah, that didn't work either. All I got left from that is my wife, because she was the one that actually, she was the musher. But he was a character. And so I followed him out to the back field, and it was this huge field. You could have put 3 football pitches on this field, had 4 trailers in it. All of these, they were really beautifully done. And he put out water, and there was each of us had our own little biffy. I was the only one there. The other 3 trailers were empty. First night was great. And then the second night, the mosquitoes started to enter that. And it was hot in the trail. Trailers like, and it had been a really unusually hot day. And I ended up sleeping in my car. I think I met Jill. Did I meet you the day? No, maybe not. Jill walked some of the trail with me. But anyway, so that was my glamping experience. I can highly recommend it. They were really, oh gosh, I don't think I put it in the book because I didn't want to dish the guy, even though he wouldn't give me the money back he gave me the money back for the nights I didn't spend, but the night I spent in the car, he didn't pay for it. Yeah, I can't remember, but it's just outside, sort of northwest of St. Hampton. Yeah, sorry, but if all he had to do was have a mosquito net, it would have been great. This is in near Glen Huron. We're getting a little bit further north. This is called Sly's Cabin. It's a reproduction of Sly's Cabin, and this is a fellow that he logged this whole area, and I just thought it was a nice little landmark. Oh, and anybody have been up this far this is something called Standing Rock. It's a 10-meter tall rock, and it's 80 meters from the escarpment. You're not really too sure how it got there. and you just kind of come around a corner, and there's this, it's a tall rock, and there it is, just sitting there. And I like I kind of like the things that have names. It was kind of fun. Does anybody know what this is? Flower pot. Somebody over there said a flower pot. So these are limestone. It's erosion that causes these. And the Bruce Trail has quite a few flower pots. I'll talk about them before. This was the first one I came to. It's on a side trail called the Margaret Paul Side Trail. One of the things that I found is that often the best things to see were on the side trails. And if you were just walking the main Bruce Trail, you would have missed a lot of these things. So I was kind of often happy that I was doing the side trails. Anyone want to take a guess at what he is? Red-breasted grosbeak. That's right. That's right. Doesn't he look like a Grinch? This would be one of the better known landmarks of us. Old Baldy, exactly, above Kimberley in the Beaver Valley. And you get to sit up on top and have lunch on his pate, on his bald head. Big climb up to there. It's beautiful. The Beaver Valley is just spectacular. The hiking there, lots of waterfalls again. So I have a little story about this was a day, and I hiked a long way. It was about halfway when I got here. I had about another, I hadn't really paid attention. I think I had about another 20 kilometers to go, and I'd already walked about 20 kilometers, which is 40 in a day. It's too much for me. But I saw a shortcut, and it was an old unopened road allowance. And I don't know if you know, but a lot of the Bruce Trail is on unopened road allowances, hydro corridors, rail corridors. If we didn't have those, we wouldn't have a Bruce Trail. So I saw this point where there was an unopened road allowance, and I thought that'd be a great shortcut back to where I parked my car. But I also realized that if I got down this road allowance and couldn't get through for whatever reason, it was going to be a 50-kilometer day and not a 40, I think it was 30 kilometers, my longest day, I think. And so I thought, well, I'm going to risk it. And there are usually two reasons why road allowances are left unopened. Often they're just too hilly, the hills are too steep, or often they go through boggy areas. Now, does anybody know what the Grimpen is? It closed. The Grimpen is where the Hound of Baskerville lived. Yeah. So I got into this hike, and it may look like the sides of that are along the edges of that pond. The Grimpen are solid, but let me assure you, they weren't solid. And I was hiking in sandals. I always hike in sandals. And I got to this, and if I had turned back at this point in time, I'd say it would have been a very long day. So I thought, I can do it. And there happened to be this, you can't tell by this, but there were sort of little stepping stones, sort of pieces of earth. And so I thought I can do it, So I had one hiking pole with me, and I had I put my phone in my back pocket, and I thought, I'm going to be able to jump from one of these. And I mean, they were the size of my foot, basically, and I was going to have to jump from one to the other. But I thought, well, I'm going to check to see what's in there. So I took my hiking pole, and it just never stopped. It was mud. The water wasn't that deep, but it was just bottomless mud. And so I hopped as far as I could, each time just managing to, not tip forward when I hopped. And then I got to one, and it was just a little too far to hop. But if I got this one, I was okay. I was going to make it across. So then I saw this sort of floating log, and I thought, well, maybe I can kind of wedge this floating log to get me half a step closer to the next thing. And so I wedged this log in, and eventually I stepped on it. And then I put both feet on it. And as soon as I moved one foot to the other end, then that started to sink, right? And so I'm standing on this thing, and I'm going down. Like, it's just sinking, and the water and the mud is coming over my sandals. And I just, in that moment of, panic, I thought, I'm just going for it. I'm leaping. And so I just leaped onto this next little island about this big, almost tipped forward and went in. By that time, I had mud everywhere, but I made it. I made it through the Grimpen. And I kept thinking, I'm a certified Bruce Trail hike leader. And I thought, this is not what a certified Bruce Trail hike leader is supposed to be doing. But and then you get to something called Nicola Ross. So I have to look at my So this is an area, a very popular, any rock climbers in the room, you might know this site. What was interesting for me, because I ran into some rock climbers back at Rattlesnake Point, some women my age, they wanted to give me a lesson. I thought, I don't think I'm going to start my rock climbing career today. At any rate, so, but what they did tell me is they said in the olden days, they said they just tie off onto whatever they could find. And it was only sometime later they were tying off onto these 500-year-old cedars. And so what the climate community has done is they put in permanent, I don't know what they call them, I'm not a rock climber. And that way, it protects the vegetation, and it also is better for the rock as well. But this is a big rock climbing area, and it's kind of fun. I stopped and chatted with them about rock climbing. Yeah, I mean, talk about entertainment on the trail. Now here, this is a little further up the way. Yes. Yeah. Oh, okay. We're getting close. Thanks. At any rate, so this is a tree that when you come across it, you go, that doesn't look native. Anybody have an idea what that is? It's a Western yew. Very good. Yeah, and not indigenous at all. There are a couple of them on the side of the trail. They're right beside this water pump that actually pumps water. I wouldn't drink it, but it pumps water. It's an old farmstead, and I guess somewhere along the line. And I understand yews are very slow growing, so this would be an old tree. And does anybody know what they used to harvest from yew trees? A chemical called Taxol. The genus name for yew is Taxus, so it's Taxol. And there's, if anybody's had breast cancer, I haven't. There's, what's the drug? Tamoxifen. And it comes from the yew. Now they produce it synthetically now, so we're not cutting down all the yew trees, but that's the source of where they found the chemical commonly used in several cancers, but breast cancer in particular. And then we got to further. This is further into the wilderness area, and after I was walking along and noticed that what I thought was a pile of rotten apples was actually steaming. Oh. Yeah, and there were a lot of piles of steaming apples. and so I started to sing, and then I saw this sign. At any rate, I did manage to make it through the bear in the area, and I'm sure they were right there. There were so many apples last year. They didn't, and they do. I did read that although you don't want to get in between, I wouldn't try this, but you don't want to get in between a sow and her cub for grizzly bears. For black bears, you don't want to get between a sow and her food. Apparently, she's much more interested, and they were going into hibernation. This is in September, and they've got to eat huge amounts of food before they hibernate. So you don't want to get between a bear and her food. It was a bit scary. You might have been to this place. This is on the Bruce Peninsula as well. No, this is called Bruce's Cave. It's huge. You can see my sister there. It's one of my sisters. And a guy named Robert Bruce, not to be confused with Robert the Bruce, who was the 15th century king of Scotland. He owned this land and he farmed it. He was a bit of a recluse, but he lived there. Obviously not very good farmland. But he would spend his winters, I loved it, he'd spend his winters, he got room and board for a price at the local jail. And so he'd live there all winter, probably the rent was like it is now, pretty high. Yeah. We're getting to the end. This is outside of Wyerton. Has anybody been up this spiral staircase? Yeah, unique way to get up. You can see my little dog at the bottom. She went up it. A lot of dogs wouldn't. She went up it. Yeah, true enough. Yeah, I only went down because she got halfway up and then went down, so I had to go and call her and get her up. I'm gonna go quickly through these. You know, these are just sights along the way. This is a fish and chip stand right by the longest boardwalk on the Bruce Trail. 5 kilometers long. I can remember the Snake Boardwalk. And I had to walk past here. I didn't know this is on the Cape Crocker First Nation. And here I walk through and there's fish and chips, like just on the, like you can't do that in the Rocky Mountains, can you? But I had to go past here and then I was climbing, then turning around and coming back again. I thought on my way back, I'm going to have fish and chips. So I was getting closer to it. And then I realized the only time on the entire trail that I hadn't carried my wallet.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. So I didn't get fish and chips.
Oh.
I should have just told them I was writing a book about this. Maybe they would have given me some. So remember, take your money. Anybody know what this is? More devils. There are a lot of devils on there. There's the devil's pulpit, this is the devil's monument. There's the devil's punch bowl. There's the devil's playhouse. So this is the devil's monument. And I had always planned to do this hike in 40 days because I always wanted to call it 40 days and 40 hikes as a takeoff on Noah, 40 days, rain for 40 days and 40 nights. And then I realized before I did the last 2 of the 9 sections on the trail that there were just too many things I wanted to see and do. I was going to have to do 2 more hikes. I was going to have to do 42. And I just thought I'm just going to call the book 42 days and 40 days and 40 hikes. Anyway, so Jill, who's in the back, she hiked a few times with me. And this was where we hiked together for 3 days. And we got to this point on day 40. So normally I should have been at Tobermory on this day, but here I was overlooking the Devil's Monument. Jill had walked with me for 3 days. We had so much fun, and she was turning back at this point. I was still walking on this particular day. And so it's just coincidence that on day 40, I end up looking at the Devil's pulpit or the Devil's Monument. And it turns out, I sort of sat there after Jill. I was kind of teary because I was on my own again. And Jill had left, and I sort of waved goodbye as she left. And I sat there for quite a long time. It was a Saturday morning, and I just sort of was contemplating this hike, as you do. I was getting near the end. I only had 2 more hikes left. And I started thinking about it. And what I discovered was fascinating, and because in the Catholic, or not the Catholic, but in Christianity, the number 40 has huge significance. Some of you, again, may know some of this. I didn't. I mean, I knew about Noah and his ark and 40 days of rain, and I cleaned up the world. I wish I could clean up the world after 40 days of rain. But 40 days is also Jesus went out into the desert for 40 days and Lent, and then he was tempted by the devil and was not. He didn't succumb, and then he came back in and continued in his ways. And Lent recognizes the time that he was out there. So Lent is 40 days long. Human gestation is 40 weeks long, and 40 in the church, Christian church, is a very significant number at the time. It represents change and renewal. So it's quite a significant number. So it's just this sort of coincidence that I happened to be at this point. And I just sat there and thought about, the Niagara Escarpment and the trail and what it meant to me. And it was kind of that moment where it kind of came together and quickly to the end. Oh, yes. This is Michigander's Arch. Another thing you see. Who knows what a Michigander is? Somebody from Michigan. Who knew? I couldn't find out what this arch was, but at any rate. Yeah, now this is kind of sad. And this was the first of my last 2 hikes at the very end of the Bruce Peninsula. I walked with my 2 sisters. They came, 2 of them, I got 3 sisters, and 2 of them agreed to walk me into Tobermory. And this was the first day we went. It was fall. It was October, just before Thanksgiving. And we, in short succession, along this dirt little road, we saw first a run over rattlesnake. Top corner, do you know what that is? That's a milk snake. I run over, and then do you know what the little green one is? A green snake. It is a green snake. And it's my favorite kind of snake. I think they're just little, but this long. Three of them all dead. And I was talking to a botanist or a biologist friend of mine, and he said snakes brumate. It's a form of cold-blooded animals. It's how they hibernate. And they are on the move, snakes, at this time of year, trying to find a place to spend the winter. And so they're crossing roads. And so these have all been killed by vehicles. Although the rattlesnake looked like it was run over by a bicycle. Just that one. And then we also saw or heard trumpeter swans and sandhill cranes at the same place. So it was neat because I started so early in the spring. It was spring and the birds and trees were alive. And then I ended in this fall setting. This is just all hard rocks. It's a cairn on the Bruce. And I made it. I made it to the end. One of my two sisters. And so I drew the cairn, and so I compared them to see if I got any better, because I actually drew the northern ones. I didn't trace it. So I think I got better, but maybe at any rate, just a few things that I learned. I'll go through quickly. Connectivity, and not just between towns, but also history, the connectivity. So much history. I learned a lot about First Nations. I learned a lot about how trails save nature. And so I'm doing out t-shirts, and they're going to say, ask not what trails can do for you, ask what you can do for your trails. Changing environment, the changing vegetation, the changing birds, into the wilderness. The founders of the Bruce Trail, they always talked about to the Bruce. And I realized that the Bruce Peninsula meant wilderness to them. And there's lots of ideas of why it was called the Bruce. I won't go into that history, it's in the book. Health benefits, many of us know. And I also learned I can draw. Or I think I can anyway. So I think this is the last slide. And Jill took this photograph of me. So
Did you take her down with all the rocks?
she had a bad shoulder for the first. I took her in the last few sections, and she was a trooper, but I couldn't take her at the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's it. I'm sorry I've gone over time. Questions, unless, I know people want to get going. Thank you. You've been a wonderful audience.